You know, I said at the beginning of my last book, Carl Gustav Jung had said that running through each life like a thread is a question that you've come to answer. And you're lucky to find it. And that the question is more important than the answer by far. So for me, it's been, certainly for the last 40 years, how do we be fully present to our world at a time when the suffering and the prospects for conscious life forms are so grim? How do we look straight into the face of our time, which is the biggest gift we can give, to be present to our time? It's so tempting to want to just pull back like a turtle inside its shell. It's so tempting to want to just close your eyes, busy yourself with other things. So how do we do that? How do we be with our world without going crazy? I think that's been the question that has pursued me, and I'm actually grateful for it. When you find a question like that, it's good news. We're seeing at this time, just when we're ready, you know, we have the capacity now to blow ourselves to bits, and that's having a huge impact on the psyche. We're also seeing that there is this immense mystery and beauty in every separate one. You look into the eyes of any being, human or non-human, you can sort of see we're in this great mystery. We go back to the teachings in the Buddhist tradition that are very meaningful to me. Central to that way of perceiving the world, just as it is central to systems thinking, is the apprehension that everything is connected. Or just like our American mystic, environmentalist John Muir said, can't pick up any piece of this world, a stone, a twig, without finding it hitched to everything else in creation. This is so strong, this recognition of our interdependence. This arises, that arises, this ceases, that ceases, this comes to be, that comes to be. It's like a teaching for our time. There's no private salvation. I can't be who I am without you being what you are. I can't be safe unless you're safe. I can't be healed unless you heal. I don't have a final, separate little refuge I can go to be redeemed and leave you out. This is amazing. And I can look at you and see within you the whole story. Just as you in your mother's womb remembered the whole journey of life evolving. What I see as really propelling at this moment this collective insanity of wasting our world is actually our economic system, our political economy, which, thanks to the phrase of Norwegian deep ecologist Sigmund Kvaløy, I too call the industrial growth society. Behind it, it has the power of industry and its mighty technologies and organization. But the truly operative word is growth. This is a political economy that sets its goals and measures its success in how fast it can grow. Grow in what? Wisdom? Health? Longevity? Creativity? One thing only. Alas, one thing only. Profits. The living systems of Earth are coming apart under the onslaught of the industrial growth society scrambling for the last dollars. So it's been several decades now that we have known that we have been taking raw materials out of the body of Earth faster than they can be renewed. People feel this. You don't have to be an economist. I mean, even a third grader can see that you can't keep growing in a limited world. But somehow, grown people walking around on two legs, particularly if they're running for office, if they acknowledge that you can't keep growing, ooh, you're a voice of gloom and doom, and nobody wants to listen to you. So there's this kind of charade of growth mania that keeps us stupid. We are going through a hard passage in the journey of humanity and planet Earth. This is a mammoth adventure. But in every myth, legend, adventure story that our culture has treasured and passed on, the hero and heroine is called at some point to look straight into the face of the monster or the Medusa and not turn to stone. And we see it as a journey in which we are, through our suffering with our world, we are seeing the immensity of the life in us. St. Francis, for example, the saint of ecology in Christianity, he didn't run from the bad news of his time. He walked with Lady Poverty. He kissed the leper. He kept his eyes open to the devastation of war and as a prisoner of war. And by being with that pain, collectively with his brothers and sisters, he could sing the canticle of the sun and open to the blessedness and holiness of life and get a sense of una immensa vita, the immensity of life. We need each other for this. We need each other in ways that I think that we never have before. Because all through human history, there was this tacit assumption that life would continue on this planet. Oh yeah, there were wars, there was poverty, there was plague and pestilence, death, of course, and illness and old age and all of that. But always there was that tacit assumption that life would continue and that the work of our hands and hearts would go on for future generations. And that's what's lost now. And that loss of certainty for the ongoingness of life is the pivotal psychological reality of our time, I believe. So my way of dealing with the overwhelm is to look it straight in the eye and say, there you are again. To realize that we are suffering with our world. And not try to pave it over and not apologize for it and not see it as a personal weakness, a personal craziness, but almost to bow to it and say, you are suffering with your world. That's the most natural thing in the world. The most wholesome, healthy thing in the world, too. Don't be afraid of your heart breaking open. The heart that breaks open can hold the whole universe. It's that big. I want so much to feel sure. I want to be able to tell people, don't worry, it's going to be okay. And you know what? I realize that would not be doing anybody a favor. First of all, we can't know. But secondly, if somehow we could be given a pill to be convinced, don't worry, it's going to turn out okay, would that elicit from us our greatest creativity and courage? No. It's that knife edge of uncertainty where we come alive to our truest power. So we do ourselves the favor. We honor ourselves to live with sufficient realism and dignity to know we're right with that knife edge of uncertainty. And we don't know how it's going to come out. There are no guarantees. And we realize, well, wait, there aren't any guarantees anyway. There are no guarantees when you fall in love that you're going to have a lasting relationship. There are no guarantees when you go into labor that you're going to have a healthy delivery. There are no guarantees when you put seeds in the soil that there'll be sufficient rain and warmth for a bumper crop. There never has been guarantee for human life. And it's in that uncertainty, and it's like a exquisite wind and fire of uncertainty, that is the nature of life. All the wise ones tell us that. That's where we come alive. And now we see that this system is becoming ever more fragile. And as this system is beginning to crumble, I just look at the mortgage crisis, look at our ecosystems, look at our farm systems. Just as that is being less and less responsive to human needs, there's something quite wonderful happening. And that is that people are proceeding to build the new within the shell of the old. There are new ways emerging, and people are realizing more and more that we can meet our needs without destroying our world. Now that sounds pretty bland, but actually that's revolutionary, because if you take seriously what proponents of the system are saying, they're telling us that the only way we're going to be able to survive is through permanent war and destruction of our environment. That's bullshit. We've come for millions of years, and certainly thousands of years of recorded history. These great monuments of learning and art and culture, science. And we're learning how to care. We've learned how to care. Our ancestors passed that knowledge on to us. It's so wonderful to be alive at this time when there is something taking place. There is a revolution taking place. And you're not going to learn about it by watching the mainstream corporate-controlled press and television. But it is mammoth. And I feel that we need so acutely to be aware of the dimensions of unfolding, what's emerging in our time. It is this, what we call, many of us, the great turning, is the transition from the industrial growth society to a life-sustaining society. Because we're seeing that what we have been living in allegiance to and dependence upon is wrecking ourselves and our world. It's robbing us of the future. So I see it as the third revolution of our human journey, So 10,000 years ago, back in the late Neolithic, we settled down, began to grow crops, produced a surplus, built walls, owned land, learned to write, learned to trade, built granaries, built temples, and this was this agricultural revolution, and it took centuries. And then the next revolution of comparable magnitude was just 300 years ago, started in England with the steam engine and the mills and the mines and cheap energy, and it's the Industrial Revolution. And that affected how we view ourselves, our value, how we relate to each other, how we understand the living earth. It began to bring to us the notion that the earth is a stockpile of resources to be extracted, or a sewer for our waste to be pumped into. It deadened the world for us and pitted us against each other in a sharpening of competition and a desperation to get what we need based on a zero-sum game. And right on the heels of that, with all the obvious comforts and powers that it brought, which we've become quite dependent on. I don't want to sneeze at that. But that's out of control now. It's a runaway system. So now is emerging a fundamental change that many see as the third revolution of our time. And Lester Brown of Earth Policy Institute calls it the ecological revolution. And more of us are simply calling it the Great Turning, because that's what it seems to us as we think more and more about the future ones, as we see ourselves approaching greater and greater breakdown. What will be left for the future ones? And that question begins to hammer at our heart. And as we think about them, and as they begin to inspire us to work and to love this life, to pass on to them, so there'll be air for them to breathe, and water for them to drink, and soil for them to cultivate, that we imagine they'll look back at us, living in these early years of the third millennium, and say, oh, those ancestors, they were taking part in the Great Turning. And while it's just as big in scope as the agricultural and the industrial revolution, it has to happen a lot faster. Everyone agrees on this. It has to unfold in just a matter of years. The good news is that it is. It is. Paul Hawken calls it blessed unrest. He calls it the greatest, largest social movement in human history. He calls it the movement with no name. Doesn't matter what you call it, but it is our great good fortune to be alive now, where we can put our wits and our strength and everything we ever learned about courage and interconnectedness to use. Sometimes I think in the work I do in the workshops, that's what I most want, is to give people a pair of spectacles so they and me, I need to see it. Well, you can see it. And I think it helps to look for it in three arenas or dimensions of the Great Turning. The most visible, perhaps, and what we have been accustomed to calling activism for peace, justice, or the environment. Those are all the actions to slow down the destruction of the industrial growth society. That's all the political, legal, legislative, regulatory efforts. It's the direct actions. And they're all aimed at buying us time by slowing down the rate of destruction. That dimension's hard because you have as many defeats as victories. wears you out. Burnout rate is high. But it's very important because it saves some lives and it saves some species. It saves some ecosystems and some of the gene pool for the society to come. But it's not enough for the Great Turning, even if everything were to succeed. Because the Great Turning, this life-sustaining society, needs structures, ways of doing things, new sets of patterns of collective behavior, new ways of construing our relations with each other at every level. And that's happening. That's that second dimension. I think of that as like green shoots coming through the rubble of a dysfunctional civilization. There are new ways of holding land, land trusts, conservancies, new ways of growing and producing the food, permaculture, biodynamic farming. I say new, but some of them very old, recaptured again. New ways of building, new forms of currency, new ways of measuring wealth and prosperity, sustainability indicators rather than the gross domestic product, new forms of healing, again, ancient ones, new and old ways of teaching, new forms of renewable energy, such incredible ingenuity at work. It is astonishing. I love it that Paul Hawken, looking at this, calls it in his book an immune response on the part of Earth. That life itself wants to go on, and it's just, well, once you get on that sort of wavelength, then you too participate in this tidal change of creativity. But these ways of doing things will shrivel and die. They won't last unless they're deeply rooted in the way we see reality, our values, our understandings. And so that's the third dimension of the Great Turning. A shift in consciousness, a change in our perceptions of reality. And that is astonishing, how vast that is right in our lifetimes. Scientists I know, systems thinkers, like Kenneth Boulding, Gregory Bateson, pioneers, they say this is the biggest bite out of the tree of knowledge in 5,000 years. Because it's a basic cognitive revolution. What is that at root? It's a recognition that our planet is a living system. It's not just a sewer and a warehouse to be despoiled. And we belong to it, like cells in a living body. It's a shift from seeing reality in terms of stuff and things and entities to seeing it in terms of flows of relationship. Self-regulating, self-evolving, that can flower through time into patterns of extraordinary complexity and intelligence. I love the way that you can, for example, in these three dimensions, enter at any point because they're mutually reinforcing. You might decide that you're going to do a holding action to save one tree, like Julia Butterfly Hill, for example, and that you'll go up for 2 weeks to sit in it. You end up going up for over 2 years and changing the mindsets of hundreds of thousands of young people through using your cell phone and the radio. Or you can decide to save one piece of the old growth forest of old Gondwana land, like my colleague John Seed of the Rainforest Information Center. And he stood there, standing there with his back to the trees while the illegal logging was going around, and the police were there to arrest the protesters, and there was the screaming of the chainsaws and shouts of the police of their bullhorns and the revving of the paddy wagon engines. And just like that, he had this epiphany that changed his life. He realized that he wasn't John Seed protecting the rainforest, but he was, in essence, the rainforest protecting herself through this piece of humanity it had cradled into existence. That experience is being repeated hundreds of thousands of times. I've seen it again and again. As people acting in defense of life wake up to the grandeur of who they really are and find sources of strength, synergies, grace, beyond what they could have expected. That's the great turning.